We have heard so much about migrants and asylum seekers this year, not just coming through Mexico. Thousands came right through the North Country over the years to cross into Canada near Plattsburgh. We've stayed in touch with one couple who crossed at Roxham Road on Valentine's Day, and we have their story on today's Story of the Day.
Support for Story of the Day comes from Pearsall Wealth Management at UBS Wealth Management USA, subsidiary UBS AG, member FINRA SIPC, 1 Broad Street, Glens Falls.
Hey, I'm David Sommerstein. It's Monday, July 24th. First up, the town of Keene has begun repairs on Marcy Field. Marcy Field and the airstrip next to it were vandalized earlier this month when an unidentified driver carved deep tire tracks through them. Yesterday, the town was asking for volunteers to help pick up wayward turf and put it back into the ruts left in the field. Town Supervisor Joe Pete Wilson Jr. says the damage isn't covered by insurance, so the town has to pay for all of the repairs by itself. According to the Adirondack Daily Enterprise, some residents of Keene have started a fundraiser to cover the costs. So far, they've raised almost half of their $10,000 goal. People fleeing from other countries to seek asylum in the U.S. and Canada, and sometimes ending up in the North Country, have been in the news all year. Illegal crossings along the southern border are actually down now following policy changes. On the northern border, Canada closed a popular and internationally known unofficial crossing known as Roxham Road. That little road in northern Clinton County was used by thousands of migrants as a pathway to asylum over the last 5 years. And we wanted to know more about how people get to Roxham Road and what their lives are like before and after they cross into Canada. So we followed one couple whose journey began in Venezuela. Kara Chapman has their story.
When you ask Luis Rangel and Maria Angel Diaz if they're married, this is what they say.
Sí, no.
Yes and no, they say.
We've been together for 12 years, but we're not legally or religiously married. But we've been en concubinato.
That's kind of like a common law marriage. The two are originally from Venezuela. It's where they had their 2 sons, ages 5 and 8. Diaz says it's the best country in the world, with its tropical climate, beaches, and the charisma of its people. But for years, the country's been plagued by rampant inflation, crime, and political persecution. Rangel says he spoke out against it.
When there were marches in Venezuela, I was one of the people who went out and protested because I didn't agree with what was happening in our country.
Rangel says that put him in danger. So he, Diaz, and their children left Venezuela for Ecuador 3 years ago. Rangel says he found work as a driver, but he wasn't making enough money to help family who were still in Venezuela, like his mother and 2 other children he has. So last October, he and Diaz decided to leave. They saved some money, left their 2 sons with Diaz's mother, and headed north.
So, we made the decision to seek a better future, to be able to help our family in Venezuela, us, and the babies we left in Ecuador.
The couple first traveled through Colombia, making their way to a place called the Darien Gap, which straddles the border with Panama. In the immigration world, this place is infamous. It's a remote, roadless crossing with dozens of miles of dense rainforest, steep mountains, and vast swamps. And it's the only overland path that connects South and Central America. It took 7 days. Just slogging through that forest was hard enough. But Rangel says it got worse. They got robbed and left without any money. When they came out on the other side of the Darien Gap in Panama, they met up with 2 of Rangel's family members. They took them in, and the next day, Rangel and Diaz continued on their journey.
Sin plata, no importa. Ellos nos regalaron $100 y con eso llegamos a frontera con Costa Rica.
The family gave them $100 to get to Costa Rica. It was there around mid-October that they learned the United States had changed things for Venezuelans. Basically, the Biden administration opened 24,000 slots for Venezuelans to legally enter the country if they had a U.S. sponsor. Those who crossed the U.S.-Mexico border illegally wouldn't be eligible and would be turned back if they were caught. But Rangel says at that point, it was too late to turn back.
We were already in Costa Rica. What were we going to do? We weren't going to leave and go back through the jungle. I wouldn't recommend that to anyone.
So he and Diaz continued north. They made their way from town to town in Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Honduras, and Guatemala selling candy. It helped them pay for transportation, lodging, food, and occasionally guides to help them cross the borders. Rangel says they always met people willing to help them along the way.
Honduras y Nicaragua son...
Like in our country, people in Honduras and Nicaragua didn't have a lot of resources. But even though they had little, people always helped us.
They eventually made it to Mexico, where they were briefly detained by immigration officials. But on January 1st, they passed through a hole in the border wall into El Paso, Texas. They worked and made their way to Denver, then took a bus to New York City. They were given assistance for several days. Friends gave Rangel an electric bike so he could work by making deliveries, but the bike broke. It was during this time that they started hearing about a tiny road that crosses into Canada here in Clinton County. They heard on TikTok and Facebook that it would be easier to get set up and find work in Canada.
No importa mucho el país.
The country doesn't really matter to us. What matters is the ability to work and make money. If you can't make money, how are you supposed to help your family? We need to send money to our family.
Diaz and Rangel got help getting a bus ticket to the Mountain Mart, a Greyhound bus station in Plattsburgh. From there, they took a taxi to Roxham Road.
El 14 de febrero, el Día de los Enamorados.
It was February 14th, Valentine's Day. Rangel says he remembers people lining up at the unofficial crossing and Canadian officers telling them to stop, that they would be arrested if they crossed. Like thousands before them, they went ahead. They walked the tiny dirt path to enter Canada. We asked Rangel how he felt that day, crossing at Roxham Road. He turns the question back on us.
¿Cómo te sientes tú después de haber abandonado todo?
How would you feel after abandoning everything? How would you feel after abandoning your family, your children, your things? It's difficult. Here we don't know anyone. We don't have a family. We don't have anything. Nothing. Here we're starting from scratch or below scratch.
They were processed, fingerprinted, and given paperwork. And the day they left Canadian immigration authorities, the couple got some news as well. Diaz, who had walked miles through a rainforest, traversed 2 continents, was pregnant. She thought she was just feeling poorly because of her menstrual cycle.
It wasn't in our plans, but a baby is always a blessing.
Rangel, Diaz, and their unexpected baby arrived in Canada when the Quebec government was calling for asylum seekers to be placed elsewhere. Leaders said the tens of thousands of people, most of whom came through Roxham Road, were overwhelming the province and its NGOs. So, instead of Montreal, where thousands of migrants were already awaiting their asylum claims, Rangel and Diaz were sent to Niagara Falls in Ontario. When we first spoke with the couple in March, they were dealing with a bunch of challenges. They didn't have Canadian phones, which made it really difficult to connect with resources and the authorities processing their asylum claim. There are fewer groups that help refugees in Niagara Falls than in places like Toronto and Montreal. And Rangel told us about how much he just wanted to work.
I'm the type of person who doesn't like to be given things. I need to make money because, aside from the children I have with my wife, I have other people to help, 2 more children. I can't spend 3 or 4 months standing around doing nothing.
But that's basically what happened. They couldn't get jobs before they had work permits because they could have lost the food and housing assistance they get from the Canadian government. So they spent their time knocking on doors to set up appointments, snapping pictures around Niagara Falls, and waiting in their hotel room. They've been sending what they can to their sons and other family back in South America. They want to send more. Luis Rangel finally got his work permit last month. He's got a job interview in August, but he's still sending around his resume. Maria Angel Diaz says they've made some other gains as well.
Que sí hemos logrado varias cositas. Por ejemplo, pudimos abrir una cuenta de banco.
She says they can open a bank account. They have a social worker. They can sign up for English classes. And they finally have Canadian phones. Rangel says from what he's seen, there are a lot of opportunities in Canada. Again and again, when we spoke with him, he said you have to be patient.
Plans are long-term. No plan is short-term. Everything has its time. If you want it, it'll come. You just have to know how to wait for it.
That goes for bringing more of their family to Canada, too. Rangel says they have to wait until they have legal status before they can send for their boys. In the meantime, they wait for the arrival of their new baby, another boy, and for their asylum claim to move forward. Kara Chapman, with interpretation and translation from David Summerstein, North Country Public Radio.
We have more news all the time on our website, ncpr.org. Music today by Ben Sharon of Watertown and Danny Thomas of Canton. I'm David Summerstein, North Country Public Radio.